Last summer, the Rio Grande stopped flowing through Albuquerque for 50 days, a dry, cracked riverbed running straight through a city of over 500,000 people. The water came back in the fall. Now the river is expected to go dry again, possibly within weeks. And this time, scientists are not calling it a drought anymore. They are calling it something permanent. The system that is supposed to stop this, a 12-mile tunnel drilled under the Continental Divide that brings water from the Colorado River Basin into the Rio Grande, was built to be the safety net for exactly this kind of crisis. It was the fix that was supposed to keep the river flowing through New Mexico no matter what. But the reservoir on the other end of that tunnel, Heron Reservoir in northern New Mexico, is sitting at 7% right now. That is the lowest level in the reservoir's entire 55-year history. The safety net is empty, and what is happening along the Rio Grande because of it is one of the worst water crises in the American West. So why is a river that feeds 6 million people running out of water with no clear way to recover? It starts with what is happening in the mountains. The Rio Grande begins high in Colorado's San Juan Mountains, and up to 75% of its natural flow comes from snowmelt. Every spring, that snowpack is supposed to melt slowly, feed into smaller streams, fill reservoirs, and keep the river alive through the dry summer months. This spring, that entire process has fallen apart. The snowpack in the Rio Chama Basin, the area that feeds into Heron Reservoir, measured 4% of normal this April. Not 4% below normal, 4% of it. In a normal year, this basin gives Albuquerque the water that keeps its taps running through the summer. This year, it is nearly empty. The Sangre de Cristo Range, another key source zone, came in at 21% of normal. And the Jemez and Pecos basins, which feed other parts of the Rio Grande system, showed zero snowpack at all. On top of that, New Mexico went through one of the warmest March heat waves ever recorded. What little snow was left in the high country melted weeks ahead of schedule. The peak runoff came and went before the growing season even started. The best guess for the rest of 2026 is that the water already sitting in the reservoirs is close to all there will be. The Rio Grande used to flow year-round from its source to the Gulf of Mexico before the 20th century. That river no longer exists. Dams and water projects turned it into a managed system where every drop is spoken for. The problem is that the system was built for a river that carried much more water, and natural flows over the past 17 years have matched the worst dry stretch in compact history. The Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, which runs watering for 11,000 farmers and 6 pueblos, is now working on a rotation system. In the worst shortages, only the pueblos with the oldest water rights get water. Everyone else is completely cut off. Heron Reservoir has a full storage of about 401,000 acre-feet. At 7%, it holds roughly 26,000. The San Juan Chama project, that feeds it through the Azotea Tunnel, is supposed to send a guaranteed amount of 96,200 acre-feet every year to the cities, pueblos, and farming districts that depend on it. But the project has sent only 39% of that promised amount across the 17-year stretch from 2009 through 2025. The outside water that Albuquerque has counted on since 2008, when the city switched from well water to river water for most of its drinking supply, is shrinking faster than anyone planned for. When the Rio Grande dries through Albuquerque, the city's San Juan Chama drinking water plant has to shut down. That plant gives the city 60 to 70% of its water in a normal year. Without it, the city goes back to pumping well water from underground. The taps still run, the showers still work. But the water is coming from a source that took decades to steady, and every summer of heavy pumping pushes it back toward the low levels that nearly drained it before. The problem is that the underground water had been coming back. After decades of too much pumping, water levels rose by about 40 feet once the city switched to river water. But that recovery has leveled off because of the heavy summer pumping every time the river goes dry. Each dry summer wipes out years of progress. The city is stuck in a loop where the backup plan hurts the backup, and the river going dry is not just a water supply problem. It is destroying the living world around it. The cottonwood and willow bosque forest that lines the Rio Grande through central New Mexico is one of the biggest riverside forests in the dry West. When the river dries, the shallow water table drops, full-grown cottonwood trees wither, and the entire bosque turns into a fire danger. Most of New Mexico is at above normal wildfire risk this spring, partly because of how dry the bosque has become. Then there is the Rio Grande silvery minnow. This endangered fish once lived across hundreds of miles of river. It is now limited to less than 5% of its original range, a narrow stretch between Cochiti Dam and Elephant Butte. Over 30 kilometers of the San Acacia Reach went fully dry in July 2024, trapping minnows in shrinking pools that could not all be saved in a single day. The species partly survives because of a backup group held at the Albuquerque Biopark and a small shelter site in Los Lunas. Workers scoop the fish out of drying pools by hand, racing to move them before the water vanishes. When a wild species depends on a tank in a zoo to avoid vanishing, the river it lives in is in serious trouble. For a while, things actually seemed like they could be handled. Extra water had been rented and released, roughly 500,000 to 700,000 acre-feet over 2 decades, to keep the river linked through Albuquerque and help endangered species downstream. That worked as long as there was spare water somewhere to rent. It does not work when the reservoirs are nearly empty. Those releases hid the true depth of the crisis for years, and now the cover is completely gone. 130 miles north of El Paso, Elephant Butte Reservoir is where the damage becomes too big to look away from. This is the largest reservoir in New Mexico. Its full storage is roughly 2 million acre-feet. When it first filled in the early 20th century, it was briefly the largest man-made lake in the world. It holds around 12 to 13% of that right now. Without heavy monsoon rainfall this summer, the reservoir could fall to about 2% by late August. That would be a new record low, worse than 2013, when the bare lake bed stretched for miles, and a bachelor party hiking across the cracked ground found a 3.2-million-year-old stegomastodon skull just sitting in the dirt. The surface water share for Mesilla Valley farmers in 2026 is just 4 inches per acre. The normal full share is 36 inches. That is not a cut. That is a collapse. Farmers who grow chilies, onions, alfalfa, and pecans across 178,000 acres of watered land are working with roughly 11% of a normal water supply. And pecans are the crop that makes this crisis feel permanent. A full-grown pecan orchard takes 15 to 20 years to reach peak harvest. If the trees dry out from lack of water, the farmer does not lose 1 season. They lose 2 decades of work that cannot be replanted and picked on any timeline that matters. Southern New Mexico and the El Paso area together grow roughly 1/4 to 1/3 of all pecans in the United States. Farmers in Dona Ana County alone have been putting out over 61 million pounds of pecans each year since 2017. That entire farming economy now runs on a fraction of the water it needs, and there is no quick fix for a crop that lives for decades and cannot survive without watering. The farmland losses are already showing up clearly in the numbers. Between 2000 and 2019, Colorado lost 18% of its watered farmland in the upper Rio Grande basin, and New Mexico lost 28% along its stretch. The farming economy of the entire basin is clearly shrinking, and the speed of that shrinkage is picking up. Across the border in Texas, El Paso, a city of about 680,000 people, normally gets roughly half of its drinking water from the Rio Grande. With river deliveries falling apart, the city is speeding up work on the largest inland plant in the world that turns saltwater into freshwater and building another plant that will turn treated used water back into drinking water. There are even plans for a pipeline from Del City, roughly 90 miles to the east, drawing from a completely different underground water source. El Paso is changing faster than almost any city in the basin. It is building the systems for a future where the river cannot be counted on. But it is changing because the river it was built around is failing, not because anyone chose this by choice. Right across the border bridge, Ciudad Juarez, a city of 1.5 million people, shares the same underground water and the same shrinking river. Under a 1906 treaty, the United States is required to send 60,000 acre-feet of Rio Grande water to Mexico every year, no matter how much water is actually in the river. And downstream along the lower Rio Grande, Mexican farmers in Chihuahua are pushing back against water owed to Texas under a separate 1944 treaty, creating a matching crisis on the same river. This is not just a word game. Roughly half of the flow drops on rivers across the Southwest over the past 2 decades are tied directly to warmer air rather than less rain and snow. The rain and snow may come in roughly the same amounts, but the heat takes more of it back before it ever reaches a reservoir or a tap. Every degree of warming speeds up that loss. And temperatures across the Rio Grande Basin are not staying flat. They are going up. The science on this shift has been growing for over a decade. The drying out of North America is now seen as something that likely cannot be reversed on any timeline that matters. This is not a drought. Droughts end. This is a lasting reshaping of how much water the land can hold, and the Rio Grande is one of the clearest examples playing out in real time. The hard numbers back this up. Snowmelt flows from the Rio Grande headwaters have been 17% lower since the year 2000 compared to the 20th century average. Climate models point to another 16 to 28% drop in coming decades. Total reservoir storage across the entire basin sits at roughly 26% of its full capacity. Farming uses 87% of the water, and underground water loss between 2002 and 2024 has averaged roughly 2.19 million acre-feet per year. By any measure, this is a survival-level water crisis. And the legal system that is supposed to manage this river cannot keep up with what the climate is doing to it. The Rio Grande Compact, signed in 1938, splits the river among Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas based on conditions from a century when the river carried much more water. The compact has no way to deal with a river that keeps shrinking for good. It just keeps handing out water that is no longer showing up. New Mexico currently owes roughly 132,000 acre-feet in missed deliveries. All saved-up credits have been used. The compact caps what New Mexico can owe at 200,000 acre-feet. If deliveries keep falling short, the state faces being forced to cut its own water use to meet what it owes downstream, even as its own reservoirs run dry. Texas sued New Mexico at the Supreme Court in 2013, arguing that well pumping by farmers in southern New Mexico grabs water that belongs to Texas under the compact. In June 2024, the Supreme Court turned down a deal between the states in a 5-4 ruling, saying it could not let Texas and New Mexico settle in a way that left the federal government, in the court's words, up the river without a paddle. The case is back in talks with no answer in sight. 3 states, the federal government, and Mexico, are all fighting over pieces of a river that the climate is no longer filling to the amounts the compact expected. And there is one last link that ties this crisis to the biggest water story in the West. The San Juan Chama project, the tunnel system that fills Heron Reservoir, pulls its water from the San Juan River. The San Juan is a branch of the Colorado River. That means Albuquerque's backup water supply is directly connected to the same system feeding Lake Powell and Lake Mead. If one system fails, the other feels it. And both are failing at the same time. The Colorado River crisis gets far more attention because it serves 40 million people. But by the numbers, the Rio Grande is in worse shape. Total reservoir storage across the Colorado system sits at roughly 36% of full. The Rio Grande Basin is at 26%. Lake Mead holds 31%. Elephant Butte holds 12%. The Colorado still has big upstream reservoirs that can be tapped in a pinch. The Rio Grande has nothing like that left to draw from. The buffer that hid the crisis for 2 decades is gone. Lake Powell could drop below its lowest safe water level of 3,490 feet by August 2026. Emergency releases from Flaming Gorge Reservoir are already underway to try to keep Powell above that mark. If upper basin states are ever forced to cut water shipments from the Colorado system to protect the dams, the San Juan Chama supply, already at 39% of its promised amount, could be cut even more. Both of the river systems that Albuquerque depends on are dropping from the same cause, the same warming snowpack in the same southern Rocky Mountains, and the city sitting between them counts on both. Last summer, the Rio Grande dried through Albuquerque for 50 days. Cracked mud where water is supposed to be, cottonwood trees withering along the banks, endangered fish scooped out of shrinking pools by workers racing against the clock. The river came back in October when the monsoon finally arrived. But it is expected to go dry again this year, possibly sooner, for the 3rd time in 5 years. 2026 marks a 3rd dry year in a row for the basin. A cracked riverbed running through the middle of a modern American city. That is not what a drought looks like. That is what a river looks like when it is slowly adjusting to a climate that has already shifted beneath it. The question hanging over the Rio Grande Basin is not whether it will change, because the forces of a warming climate will force change no matter what. The question is whether that change will be planned and chosen, with towns, farmers, and governments making hard calls about how to share less water fairly, or whether it will be forced by collapse, with the river itself deciding who gets cut off and when. That choice is not just an idea anymore. It is playing out right now in cracked reservoir beds and federal courtrooms and watering ditches running dry across 3 states. The question is, who makes the call? If you want to see how this connects to the crisis unfolding on the Colorado River and at Lake Powell, that video is on screen now.